get some!
Ice cream.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian, and I am sad to report today that we don't have a lot of light news stories in the rundown today. It is a heavy news day. We have been off on holiday vacation to celebrate the holidays, but during that time, a lot of news broke, a lot of heavy, depressing news broke that I think is important to fill you all in on. But I promise it will be a good show. It will be an informative show. And later on in the first hour, Cenk Uygur will be joining us to give us updates on his presidential campaign. As you all know, he's running in the Democratic primary. It is a long shot campaign, but nonetheless, his objectives with this campaign are important, including fighting for the ability of naturalized citizens to run for president in the United States, so they're no longer treated as second-class citizens. So we'll get to that later in the second segment of this hour. But we begin with updates on the war on Gaza, because the situation on the ground has not improved at all over the last several days. In fact, Israel is intensifying its military operations despite calls for more targeted military operations in the Strip. So I want to give you updates on that and more. Let's get started.
In Gaza itself, hospitals are overrun with the injured and the dead. The World Health Organization says almost all the hospitals in the Gaza Strip have now stopped functioning.
There's blood everywhere in these hospitals at the moment. We're seeing almost only trauma cases come through the door, and at a scale that's quite difficult to believe. It's a bloodbath, as we said before. It's carnage.
After raiding and bombing refugee camps in northern Gaza, the Israeli Defense Forces have now moved on to doing the same in central Gaza. And let's not pretend as though they're not also engaging in aerial bombardments in the south, where they had previously told Palestinians to evacuate to for safety. Now, Israel's offensive is one of the most devastating military campaigns in recent history. More than 20,900 Palestinians, 2/3 women and children, have been killed, and that's according to the health ministry in Gaza. That is actually, despite what Israel will say, a very conservative estimate of the number of people who have perished in the Gaza Strip. It does not include the number of Palestinians who remain trapped under the rubble following aerial bombardments of the Gaza Strip, following aerial bombardments of residential buildings, of refugee camps, of hospitals, and more. Let me give you the rest of that graphic, where the UN Human Rights Office said the continued bombardment of Middle Gaza had claimed more than 100 Palestinian lives since Christmas Eve. Now, that number is very likely to have risen since the report came out by the Associated Press. But things have gotten worse for Palestinians struggling to stay alive. In fact, the Associated Press reports that residents in central Gaza described intense and lethal artillery shelling and airstrikes in refugee camps, including Nusrat, Maghazi, and Burej camps. Now, let's take a look at the next video, which will give you some more information about the attacks on these refugee camps and the number of civilians who have perished as a result.
At the Burej camp in central Gaza, these families are on the move again, heeding Israeli warnings to evacuate. But safety in Gaza is hard to find. Riyad Abdel Salam said even evacuating is dangerous.
They threw leaflets at us and told us to get out with our hands above our heads. They shot F-16 bullets and rounds of gunfire around us. We have been forced out.
The continued Israeli strikes hit even so-called safe zones. Mariam Al-Omsi has lived through decades of conflict.
75 years of suffering, our rights taken, our country seized, and our people slaughtered.
And as fighting in Gaza rages on, the death toll keeps rising. Mainly women and children. Some so little and so stunned, they don't cry out in pain. Across Gaza, there's no shortage of pain. This boy cries out for a loved one and gives a final kiss goodbye.
The footage toward the end of that video absolutely broke me this morning. I don't know how anyone can see these scenes and think, no, this is totally justified. This is totally okay. And no place in the Gaza Strip is safe. As you heard in that video, they're also doing aerial bombardments of the south, and Israel has taken complete responsibility for that with absolutely no remorse. In an area Israel had declared a safe zone, a strike hit a home in Mawasi, a rural area in the southern province of Khan Yunis. One woman was killed and at least 8 were wounded, according to a cameraman working for the Associated Press at the nearby hospital. In response, Israel's military said that it wouldn't refrain from operating in safe zones if it identifies terrorist organization activity threatening the security of Israel. And according to Israel's far-right government, everyone in the Gaza Strip, every single Palestinian has been radicalized. So in their eyes, every single person living in the Gaza Strip is a target, is a threat to Israel's safety. And you're gonna hear from spokespeople from Netanyahu's government making that claim in just a moment. Now, many of the Palestinians being told to evacuate had already evacuated from the north to the south, hoping for safety, and that is not what they got. The Israeli military ordered residents to evacuate a belt of territory the width of central Gaza, urging them to move to nearby Deir al-Balah. The UN Humanitarian Office said the area ordered evacuated was home to nearly 90,000 people before the war, and now shelters more than 61,000 displaced people, mostly from the north. But again, as we know, even they're not safe, even though they went to this area for safety. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also continues to humiliate the American government as the Biden administration continues to claim that they are urging Netanyahu's government and the IDF to do something to minimize the number of civilian casualties and engage in more strategic and targeted strikes against Hamas. And the AP notes that Netanyahu continues to mock the United States on the international stage, essentially embarrassing our government, embarrassing the American people. Netanyahu said the military was deepening the fighting. The Washington Post reported similar statements from Netanyahu. The war isn't close to finished, Netanyahu said during a visit to Gaza Monday. We are expanding the fight in the coming days, he said in comments released by his Likud party. This will be a long battle. This coming from a prime minister who back in 2015 said, if you vote for me, if you keep me in office, I will prevent the formation of a Palestinian state. A statement that he repeated in recent weeks to the press. Isn't it so great that I prevented the formation of a Palestinian state? Now this further highlights the embarrassment that the United States has become on the world stage. And I don't say that with any glee. I don't say that as if it's something to be proud of. I'm embarrassed by it. I'm embarrassed that our government continues to fund their military operations, continues to provide the 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs that are terrorizing innocent civilians in the Gaza Strip. And I'm embarrassed that we have an incredibly weak, pathetic government that claims that they're urging Netanyahu to rein things in a little bit, but he refuses to do it, and we continue to support him. Now, Israel's lack of self-awareness was on full display during an exchange on CNN when an Israeli spokeswoman by the name of Tal Hendrik was challenged on the military operations and clear disregard for civilian lives. In years prior, it would be rare to see this kind of exchange on CNN, and I want to give the anchors here a lot of credit, especially Kilar, who's going to push back against some of the claims made by the spokeswoman. Let's watch.
This ideology is also very much rooted in the Palestinian society. They're raising generation after generation to believe that there's no hope and that there's so-called refugees of wars that they themselves started.
Look at the pictures coming out of Gaza.
Will cease to exist.
When you see those pictures coming out of Gaza, do you see why some people don't have hope looking at those pictures?
Well, we are in the middle of a war that Israel did not start and did not want. Well,
but it is prosecuting it, Tal. It is prosecuting it forcefully, and you see the pictures here.
First, Hamas must be gone, and then we hope that the Palestinian society will de-radicalize. And we can't have, what our troops are finding right now on the ground in certain neighborhoods in Gaza, pictures of children, women with guns, Hamas uniform tailored for children, and a Hamas terrorist that we have arrested just admitted on record.
Does that make the children justifiable enemies to you?
It does make them justifiable enemies to them. I mean, she hated the pushback and denied the claims that Israel sees the children as justifiable targets for their military operations, but actions speak louder than words. I mean, what do we call this when the IDF is bombing hospitals, making them inoperable? Okay, not a single hospital in the Gaza Strip right now has the functionality necessary to treat wounded patients. What exactly are we supposed to call this when they are intentionally and with zero remorse bombing refugee camps, knowing full well that those refugee camps have innocent civilians within it? Simply claiming, oh, Hamas uses them as human shields isn't good enough to justify the airstrikes that they continue to do, the shelling that they continue to engage in. What exactly do we call it when a mother and daughter within a church are walking to a bathroom and they are shot and killed by Israeli snipers in the Gaza Strip? What exactly would we refer to that as? Were those two women, were the mother and daughter, were they allegedly Hamas militants? What exactly do we call that? What exactly are we supposed to say? It is pathetic, the number of people in this country and in the UK, to be quite frank, who provide cover for what the IDF is currently doing in the Gaza Strip. And then they have the audacity to claim that, well, all these Arab countries that are fired up about this, all these Arab countries who are concerned about Palestinian civilians, why don't they do the right thing and help Israel in their ethnic cleansing and take the refugees into their own countries? Why don't they absorb the refugees into their own countries? For any American making that claim, hey, the United States government loves to moan and groan about the treatment of Venezuelans in Venezuela. Why doesn't the United States government just absorb the Venezuelan refugees that we're so concerned about? Interesting, right? What's good for the goose is good for the gander. But I would venture to say that Arab countries, first of all, don't have that responsibility and don't want to engage in assisting Israel with the ethnic cleansing that they want to carry out. But they are making the Gaza Strip unlivable when there's essentially no infrastructure left, no housing left, no hospitals left, no refugee camps left. When they're talking about pumping seawater into the tunnels, thus totally sacrificing what's left of the drinkable water in the Gaza Strip. How exactly is the Gaza Strip supposed to support human life? Could it be that we should maybe believe what the far right-wing government officials in Israel keep saying over and over again to the press in their country about how they want to level the Gaza Strip, how they want to make it unlivable, how they want to use the Gaza Strip as a buffer zone to provide space between Israel and Palestinians? Maybe we should believe people when they tell us who they are. But no, we're gonna go ahead and pretend like we don't see what we're seeing, we don't hear what we're hearing, and we don't read what we're reading. But let me give you more. Anyone who dares speak out against what Israel is carrying out is deemed anti-Semitic. We've heard it over and over again. In fact, the UN is the latest agency to be referred to as anti-Semitic, or an international organization of various countries. The only two major countries that continue to support Israel at this moment are the United States and the UK. Every other major country on the world stage wants a ceasefire, has voted for a ceasefire. But the US and the UK continues to provide cover for Israel. So for instance, last week, the UN Security Council called for speeding up humanitarian aid deliveries to Gaza following reports that at least a quarter of Gazans are starving and now dying under Israel's siege. By the way, what do you call that? When you intentionally starve an entire population of people. when you engage in the collective punishment of an entire population of people. What is that called exactly? Oh, is this just war? Is that what this is? Just war. This is just war. It's just collateral damage. Intentionally starving people to death, denying them water so they can stay alive. What is that called? Just curious. Israel continues to severely limit food, water, fuel, medicine, and other supplies entering the region. The UN Security Council called that out. And so as a result, the UN Security Council, the UN overall, they're not supporters of Israel, they're anti-Semitic, they're Jew haters, right? Israel said it would no longer grant automatic visas to UN employees and accused the world body of being complicit partners in Hamas's tactics. Government spokesman Elon Levy said Israel would consider visa requests case by case that could further limit aid efforts in Gaza. Oh, I'm sure that's not intentional at all. And I'm also sure it's not intentional that they are not allowing journalists into the region so they can corroborate and verify some of the claims being made. I'm sure that's all a mistake, that's all an accident. Palestinian bodies are now, in some cases, impossible to even identify, and they're being thrown into mass graves. Here is one example.
Israeli authorities have handed over the bodies of approximately 80 people through the Karam Abu Salim crossing. These are people who were arrested and kidnapped in Gaza City and northern Gaza. So far, we don't know their names or the total number. However, it is estimated there are 80 people. This truck just entered the Karam Abu Salim crossing, southeast of Rafah. It is now headed towards the Abu Yusuf al-Najjar hospital, and the bodies will be examined to identify the people if possible. As you can see, this truck is arriving now and is carrying the bodies of those people. This is the first time bodies have been handed over to the Palestinian side through the official border crossing for identification and burial processes here in Gaza.
Now, for anyone who feels that Al Jazeera is too biased to trust their reporting, same report by CBS News this morning, by CNN, by American media, that has actually been incredibly friendly to Israel, especially in previous wars with the Palestinians. But in this case, the evidence is mounting. The footage from the Gaza Strip is impossible to deny. And even the friendly corporate media news outlets have no choice but to be honest about what we are seeing on the ground in the Gaza Strip. And let's not forget about the fact that this is, in fact, now already dragging us into a broader war in the region. In fact, things became even more intense over the weekend. I want to get to the details about this expansion. So Israel launched airstrikes in Damascus, Syria, and here are some more details on why they did that and what this could lead to.
Iran vows that Israel will pay the price after the death of a major Iranian official in an airstrike in Syria. NPS Tayyip has more.
The funeral of Sayed Razi Mousavi was led by the Syrian military. One of Iran's top advisors to its Revolutionary Guard, he was killed in an Israeli airstrike in a Damascus neighborhood on Monday. Tehran vowed revenge for Mousavi's killing amid growing fears the Israel-Hamas war could engulf the region.
So they're carrying out airstrikes in Syria. They're taking out military leaders from Iran in other countries, in Syria in this case. That's leading to Iran saying that they will in fact retaliate. Gee, I wonder if this is going to expand into a broader war. If things are already unstable and will be further destabilized in that region as a result of Israel's belligerence. And yes, I use that word clearly and accurately, belligerence. They do not care about the deaths of innocent civilians. That is riling up people in the Arab world for good reason. How can anyone watch what's happening and feel that it's okay and justified? As a result, you have militant groups retaliating, whether you're talking about the Houthi rebels or other Iran-backed militias like Hezbollah. And the United States, of course, is gonna get dragged into it. The United States has already been dragged into it. So my question to you is, are we okay with sacrificing our brave men and women in the military to fight Israel's wars? I'm not okay with that. And I really think that we should take a moment to consider all all the issues we have in our own country, all of the issues we have within our own military, where we abandon our own military veterans when they need health care, when they need mental health care, does it really make sense for us to exert ourselves and our resources to fight Israel's battles and Israel's wars as their far right-wing government continues with its belligerence? Really take a moment to ask yourself that. And as you do that, consider the fact that we already have soldiers who have been severely wounded as a result of engaging in Israel's war on Israel's behalf. I'll tell you how. So the United States has launched airstrikes against Iran-backed militias in Iraq. You thought we were done with Iraq, right? We're not done with Iraq. It took Israel to drag us right back in. Let's watch.
Since the outbreak of the war, Iran-backed groups in Syria, Iraq and Yemen have launched a slew of attacks on US and allied forces. On Monday, militias conducted a drone attack on Erbil Air Base, wounding 3 US service members, 1 critically. In response, Washington said it struck 3 sites used by pro-Iran groups.
While we do not seek to escalate conflict in the region, we are committed and fully prepared to take further necessary measures to protect our people and our facilities.
The Iran-backed Kateb Hezbollah makes up part of the Hashd al-Shaabi, a coalition of former paramilitary forces now integrated into Iraq's regular army. The Iraqi government hit back at the American strikes, saying this step harms bilateral relations between the two countries, and above all, it represents an unacceptable violation of Iraqi sovereignty.
What are we doing? What are we doing? Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin claiming that we are going to do whatever it takes to protect our people and our facilities is a complete joke. It's a joke. Because if he were serious about that, and if the United States government, under the leadership of the very weak and pathetic Joe Biden, were serious about that, then they would stop assisting Israel in its belligerence. They would stop providing the weaponry and the funding for Israel to carry out their barbaric acts in the Gaza Strip. But they're not doing that, are they? Oh, don't worry, Biden's wagging his finger. Hey, Netanyahu, please, please, please be a little better, please. Pathetic, embarrassing. We are a laughingstock on the international stage. Absolutely embarrassing. And to sacrifice members of our own military to do this, to destabilize the region on behalf of Israel, I think is incredibly shameful, especially since we're doing it on behalf of a government that is led by a man who propped up Hamas, who funded Hamas, who consistently brags about how he prevented the formation of a Palestinian state. Benjamin Netanyahu did all of that. And we are spending our resources and sacrificing our soldiers on behalf of that government. No thanks. We got to take a break. We'll be right back.
Our audience has given us everything, so we couldn't be more connected. When we first started, people would start giving us directions and say, okay, the mics are too large, move them. Turn them into lav mics. I mean, they were incredible. And then one guy walked in and gave us a really expensive switcher and said, you guys need this, and walked out. Okay, it's amazing. They helped us build a studio. They did a $2 million funding campaign for us. And so they really are us. We do this show together to the point where some of our hosts are even former listeners. So when we say that the audience is part of TYT, we really mean it.
I think what the audience also appreciates is especially if they're members, they really get an inside look into who we are, our personal lives, what drives and motivates us. It goes beyond just storytelling. I think that what we do is allow our viewers and our listeners into our daily lives, and we give them kind of like this inside look into everything that we're passionate about and why it is that we're doing what we're doing, right? Like the motivation behind what we're doing, I think is important for our audience to know, and we're not shy about sharing that with them. And it's different from what people typically see in legacy media outlets, where everything is kind of dry and robotic and there's really no personality or authenticity that comes along with it. Oftentimes when we're doing the show, I don't really think of it as me telling them stories. I think of it as us having a mutual respect and conversation with one another. And as I said earlier, I mean, not only do I feel that through the work I do, I'm informing our audience, but they inform me oftentimes as well. You know, they'll pitch stories to us. They'll tell us, you know, a certain perspective or angle to a story that we might have missed. And I love it.
How in the world are you going to get the right to vote if you don't already have the right to vote? That's impossible. Reason they tell you things are impossible is because they don't want you to try. It only took 7 years for that to get an amendment to get a right to vote.
Does this result in millions upon millions of Americans losing their coverage? And we've been waiting to find out, and now we know, yes, it will cut millions.
Public education was supposed to be the way to equalize everyone regardless of their socioeconomic status. But if you come from a family that's poor, how are you going to afford grade school for your kids?
This fight is about fairness and morality. It's about the American values.
You think that black people all across the country, in every city, were all lying when they said the police abuse and the police kill us when they should? No, of course they weren't lying. Yes, it does happen. Yes, they do get targeted more.
Why are we going to put immigrants in prison for 5 years, which American taxpayers have to pay for, if we're so concerned with immigrants using up our so-called resources?
We're gonna do both. We're gonna fight Trump and we're gonna fight the establishment. It is not that hard. Yes, you can do both at the same time. Go tell them.
Welcome back to TYT. Joining us now is Cenk Uygur, who is running for president and challenging Joe Biden in the Democratic primary. Cenk, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Anna.
So I wanted to have you on to give us some updates on how your primary campaign is going. There was a lot of drama with some states refusing to allow you on the ballots. We're gonna get to that in just a moment, but there was also some good news in regard to states that will allow you on their primary ballot. So tell us about the states that have decided to do the right thing here.
Yeah, there's so much bad news, I forgot that there was good news. You're right. Texas, Oklahoma,
wow.
Vermont, Minnesota, and they said it wasn't possible. Okay,
so 4 states.
4 states so far and counting. And look, seriously, a lot of people thought, oh, you won't be able to get on a single state. You're not a natural born citizen. I know we're going to talk about our lawsuit in a minute, but they were wrong. They were wrong about the process. They're wrong about how you get on ballots, and they're wrong about the constitutional issue. People who are like amateur, amateurs online think that they know everything because of 8th grade. You just don't. Like, who knows the Federal Election Commission decision on Hassan? Not that Hassan, another Hassan, right? That allows you to run. You don't know that, so why are you pretending you do? I feel like I want to say to all my critics, but yes, we're on in 4 states.
Well, look, to engage in full disclosure, because I think it's important. I was a little salty about your run in the beginning.
No.
I think it was pretty obvious to the audience, even though I did my best to conceal it.
No, it was not that good.
I'm not good at concealing the way I feel about things.
No,
but
not your strength.
I've since changed my mind because even though you winning the primary is obviously a long shot, I think that the legal battle that you want to engage in here on behalf of naturalized citizens is important, and I'm curious to see where it goes. So talk to me a little bit about the lawsuit your campaign filed in South Carolina.
Yeah. So South Carolina takes $20,000 from each of the candidates, and then the state party decides who is a bona fide candidate and who isn't. Okay, so now South Carolina was actually a little bit better than Florida and North Carolina, Tennessee, and now Massachusetts that have all said, me, Marianne Williamson, and Dean Phillips, and everyone else on planet Earth are not qualified to run in the Democratic primaries. So 4 states have said, no, we don't care what our voters think. We don't want to know. We're not interested. It's going to be Joe Biden, and we don't care how badly he's, but we don't care about anything. You're banned. None of you are allowed to run.
Okay, can I just interject real quick? So guys, understand how insane that is, okay? Because we're talking about, take Cenk out of it for a minute. If you want to make the argument, well, he can't run, he's a naturalized citizen. Okay, fine. But what argument are you going to make in regard to Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson also being barred from the primary ballots in these states?
So look, I don't know if we'll have time to talk about my experience running because it's so interesting, and I've got more comments about Marianne Williamson and Dean Phillips than I do about myself, because the way that the press has treated them is revelatory. It shows you exactly what the press is about, but it also shows you what the Democratic Party is about. So Dean Phillips is a sitting US congressman. If he runs for his re-election in his congressional district, the Democratic Party loves him, and he's a beloved incumbent, and that's how he was treated his whole life, right? Or at least since he's been involved in politics. But the minute he runs for president, he's persona non grata. And you're not allowed to challenge Joe Biden, and you're not even allowed on the ballot as a sitting US congressman. That's insane. And then Marianne Williamson ran last time, was in the debates last time, and has been polling higher than anyone outside of Trump, Biden, and DeSantis the entirety of the election, and not allowed on the ballot.
It's insane.
In those 4 states. So 4 states have banned everybody. 4 states have allowed everyone, including myself, right? There's a lot of states left to decide. And then there are the states like South Carolina where only I've been banned. And so in South Carolina, to answer your original question, they said, we're not gonna give you the $20,000 back. So we're ripping off little old ladies who donated to your campaign. And we've made a constitutional decision that you're not qualified because what, you're constitutional law scholars? No, they're not. They don't know anything, right? But I get it. Okay, fine. You made that decision, no problem. That allows me to bring it to court and challenge your decision, which is exactly what we're doing. So we're doing it on core constitutional grounds. So I've talked to you before about the 14th Amendment. And if you get into the details a little bit more, we're making a case that the 14th Amendment explicitly repealed the natural born citizen clause because it is the only natural and born and naturalized are only mentioned in the Constitution in those 2 places. Must be a natural born citizen, then the 14th Amendment says, no, born or naturalized, you have due process and equal rights, okay? So we think, and we make an excellent case for other court cases that show that amendments are explicitly repealed without saying, oh, by the way, we are repealing that part of the amendment. In fact, the 14th Amendment repeals the 3/5 clause that black people are 3/5 and never mentions it. So, but it is still considered an explicit repeal of it. And then we have a great case for an implicit repeal. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on the legal issues. We have an excellent case for a First Amendment issue, not only for me, but a South Carolina Democratic voter who is a supporter of mine has joined the case.
Oh, wow.
And now we are suing together, and he's saying, how about my First Amendment rights? You're not letting me vote. You're taking my voice. This is the person I want to vote for, and you're not letting me do it. I have rights.
And that's important because in order to make this case, you need standing in South Carolina. And you have a voter who's making the case that he wants to support you and isn't given an opportunity in a country that's supposed to have a democratic process in place.
Right, and of course I have standing because I'm a bona fide candidate running for office and they're not letting me, right? And so we both do. And then the last issue is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That doesn't affect whether you could be president, but it affects whether you should be on the ballot or not. And it very, very clearly says you cannot discriminate based on national origin. So now whether you can discriminate in terms of serving as president is a constitutional issue the courts are going to settle. But even if we win that small part of the case on the Civil Rights Act, that means that any naturalized citizen can run. Okay, and guys, last thing on this, Anna, when the better that I do, the better that any of these candidates do, it makes the Supreme Court's job harder if they're gonna say, no, we're gonna discriminate, because then they have to say, we're not only discriminating against Cenk, but we're discriminating against all the people that wanna vote for him.
That is an interesting argument. You know, it's the other thing that I'm curious to see is how the Supreme Court, if they do take this up, how they are going to decide the case, because we're talking about Supreme Court justices, most of whom are conservative and believe in the literal interpretation of the Constitution, just interpreting it based on the plain language of the Constitution. And the plain language, based on the way you're interpreting it, is the way that I would assume the Supreme Court would interpret it, right?
Look, if I love that they have that principle of plain meaning of the law, okay? Because there's no argument at all for the other side if you're looking at plain meaning. It says all persons born or naturalized have due process and equal protection. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about it. In fact, if you wanted to write a repeal of the natural born clause, this is almost exactly how you would write it. And I'll put it in layman's terms. If you put in an amendment in the Constitution that said, you're not allowed to eat donuts, okay? And they meant, oh, we didn't mean that. We meant you're not allowed to carry a switchblade. But you wrote, you're not allowed to eat donuts. Plain meaning, you're not allowed to eat donuts. It's over, sorry. That's what the words mean, words have meaning, right?
Right.
And in this case, it is super clear, it is super explicit. There's no question about it at all. Naturalized citizens have the same exact rights. And in fact, the Supreme Court has ruled that way, just not on the presidential case. So honestly, I don't even understand I know, I get it. There's lots of law professors who are like, well, no, that's, if equal doesn't really mean equal. And they're like, well, what about, for example, your age? You have to be 35. Does equal mean that? But it didn't say anything about age. It said naturalized, equal. Again, you almost couldn't write it any better if you were trying to repeal that section of the Constitution. And it doesn't matter because it's the absolute plain meaning of the language.
So let's move on to a poll that your campaign commissioned. The results, to be quite frank, were not that surprising to me, given the polling, the average of polls that show how vulnerable President Joe Biden is if he runs head to head with Donald Trump. So tell us what the results were, what you asked likely Democratic voters. And I also want to talk a little bit about an Associated Press NORC poll that asks likely voters how they feel about the primary process. But let's start with the poll that your campaign commissioned.
We only asked 3 questions because we don't have a lot of money.
Okay, all right.
But we needed to do a sample size that was significant, and we need to do it with a polling organization that people would trust. So we went with YouGov, did 1,200 people, so that's what a normal presidential poll does. So we basically, but we only asked 3 questions. So one was me versus Biden head to head, and that's 83 to 17. So I get 17 points head to head with Biden. Now, but I'm honest, I'm not a normal politician. Like, you don't get to go head to head. That's not really how it works. There's other people in the race.
Right.
And when there's other people in the race, I don't do nearly as well as 17, okay? Now, but having said that, that shows you incredible weakness on Biden's part. I would have gotten 0 against Obama. Absolutely 0. Okay,
true.
And so I'm getting 17 points in a head-to-head matchup against Biden. Okay, and that's with no mainstream media coverage, literally 0 mainstream media coverage. Okay, so now when you go to, and then we asked with everybody involved, and the third question, the only one we had left, I decided we're going to ask: are you worried about the chance of Biden winning, or are you worried about him losing to Trump? Right, basically, and 77% of people said. Democrats, not average person. Democrats and leaning Democrats said yes, concerned. And I'll break it down for you real quick. It's 27% said very worried, 25% said somewhat worried, and 23%, I'm sorry, another 25% said slightly worried. So giant numbers of Democratic voters going, we're really, really worried that this guy's not gonna win. Who's this Cenk Uygur guy? Yes, 17 points.
Wow.
17 points for Cenk Uygur, which they've never heard of in mainstream media.
Well, I mean, look, Biden believes that he is best suited the best possible candidate to beat Donald Trump. So if he believes it, shouldn't we just go along with him?
Well, if you live in Washington or New York and you're a mainstream media figure or a regular politician, you go, of course, we bow our heads to the dear leader. Numbers and facts don't matter at all. Like, I mean, look, guys, he's at polling at 34%, right? That's no one has ever polled out low and won, no incumbent in the history of the United States of America in federal elections. If you want to bury your head in the sand, you can choose to do that. But so this guy's gonna pull off the most miraculous comeback in American political history. Oh, if you believe that, okay, but you're nuts. He's down to 24% with independents. Absolutely no chance of winning. And we're flat out choosing to lose, and to, of all people, Donald Trump. This is total insanity.
What do you think explains the unearned confidence of the Biden campaign? Because they see the polls, they're not blind to it.
I'm gonna tell you,
and they say the same thing over and over again, which in other contexts could be true, but in this context, given the lack of popularity for Biden, given the various polls that have come out one after another showing how vulnerable he is to Donald Trump, it's hard to believe that they really think, well, there's a lifetime between now and the general election, and Biden's gonna turn it around by the time we get to the general election. Do you really think they believe that? Or do you think the Democratic Party and the Biden campaign in particular is kind of hanging its hat on Trump's legal battles, hoping that that will do him in and allow for Biden to clear an easy victory?
So when you say, do they think that, there's layers to it. So let me do it as quickly as I can. Joe Biden has lost touch with reality, but honestly never really had much of a touch to begin with. So I'll tell you a story I've never said on air before. So a person that I know went to go work with Joe Biden back when he was a senator, and he got an interview, and Biden's chief of staff told him, if you want the job, don't say anything during the interview. He said, what do you mean don't say anything? How would I get the job? He's like, just trust me. He goes in, comes back out, and he told me, this is many years later that he tells me the story. He said, I said maybe 2 lines in a 45-minute interview. He spoke the rest of the time.
Wow.
Okay, and I said, did you get the job? He said, yeah, I did. Because Biden is an egomaniac. He's a narcissist of extreme degree. And so, but the mainstream media covers that up. Everyone who knows Biden knows he's a narcissist. And so you can't get in a word edgewise. I've met Joe Biden twice. I couldn't get in a word edgewise. He loves the sound of his own voice. So if you tell him, Joe, you really can't do it. He's like, no way, I'm the greatest person, greatest politician that's ever lived. Of course I could do it.
Seems like
I'm the only one who could do it.
Let's relax for a second. It seems like a bit of an exaggeration given like Biden's the guy who's like, squints into the camera and is barely able to get a sentence out.
I hear you. He probably wouldn't say it with the same style.
Right.
But having said that, the one place where he gets animated when it's about him. And then he gets super animated. Plus he's 81, and honestly, people sometimes get stubborn when they are 81.
To be fair, we've also seen in 2020 various instances of Biden getting challenged at various campaign events, and during those events, he would insult those challenging him. And I'm talking about Democratic voters. I mean, he called one Democratic voter fat.
Yeah. He gets really cranky if you touch his pride.
Right.
Okay. So now the second layer is people who are his enablers. And so half of them know he's going to lose and half of them don't. The ones that don't are like, oh no, we're gonna make a comeback. And he's not that far down, and polls don't mean anything. They have all of these excuses. They go through them one by one to delude themselves. He's the only one who's ever beaten Trump. Well, what does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. The Steelers beat the Cowboys back in the 1970s. That doesn't mean a goddamn thing. How are they doing today, right? But they get themselves to believe, and their number one problem for them is they think, well, every election is 50-50 now. No, he's losing every single swing state. If this keeps going, he's gonna get beyond the swing states and lose other states. We're in landslide territory. He's down 8 points to Trump and he's gotta win by 5. Down 13 overall. Lunatics and self-interested, easy to delude themselves. The other guys aren't deluding themselves. They just think, well, I'm the head of the DNC, or I'm a very important cabinet official for Biden, or I'm an important ally of Biden. I'm his campaign co-chair, whatever it is. And they're like, if Biden loses, I'm irrelevant.
If Biden drops out of the race,
I'm irrelevant.
Right.
And some of them will literally lose their jobs. So they think, I don't give a damn that we're gonna lose. Of course we're gonna lose. Who cares? The Democrats lose all the time, Republicans lose all the time. The question is, am I gonna get to keep my job? And if we lose the general election, most of those people keep their jobs. But if Biden loses the primary, none of them keep their jobs. So that's another factor. And then finally, the last layer is the Democratic voters who have been betrayed by mainstream media, who have told them polls don't matter, numbers are irrelevant, facts are BS, don't listen to facts, just listen to the leader. And the leader will, and oh my God, never trust a progressive, never trust an outsider, never trust anyone who isn't a very old politician,
right?
Who hasn't died in the wool. So that's how they've deluded themselves in this way. Later, they'll all pretend that they knew all along. I guarantee you could write it down in stone, and they'll say, like in the middle of the general election, a panic will set in because he's only going to go further down, right? And then they'll go, how did we get into this mess? How come somebody didn't warn us? And then we'll, like me, James Carville, Bill Maher, some people that I don't agree with, Axelrod, we're all Marianne Williamson, we'll throw up our hands and go, we told you 100 times and you yelled at us. You sent John Fetterman to go yell at us. Fetterman's now going around yelling at anyone who dares to challenge Biden. He went after James Carville today.
I know, we're gonna talk about it on the show later, but I'm sure it's gonna work out real well for Fetterman by basically mocking the very people who helped him get elected in the first place. But let's move off of him. I don't wanna waste time talking about Fetterman in the context of this interview. I do wanna just say though that, it's interesting because there seems to be this rejection of the polling. There seems to be a rejection of allowing a robust primary, a Democratic primary to challenge Biden. But I don't know whether you entering the race has really made any difference for the Biden campaign. I mean, that was the other objective you had. One objective, of course, was to deal with the issue of naturalized citizens being barred from running. The other objective was to persuade the Democratic establishment to allow for a robust primary. Has there been any positive movement on that?
The only thing that is, there's two things that are positive, right? Not about the primary system, that's the bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy will not move if the leaders don't move, okay? So the only two positive things is that I have been in communication with senior people in Biden's team. I'm not at liberty to say, I could say it right now, but I'd be betraying confidence and I don't want to do that, and that's counterproductive, right?
Correct, yeah.
But I've been in touch with them. They are perfectly aware and have made the case to Biden that I am making, okay?
Okay.
So that's why I'm positive it's Biden who's being intransigent.
Wow.
It's Biden himself who's like, no, I'm the greatest. And I'm the only one who could beat Trump. That's why he said it the other day. That's why he reflexively said, I'm the only one who could beat Trump, okay? And so-
That's crazy.
But at least we got through to them, okay? That's number one. And number two, look, overall in the media, now it's split. Now a quarter of the media, a third of the media, including some mainstays, like I just said, Carville, Maher, Axelrod, on MSNBC and CNN are saying, I'm not sure he's gonna win, and I wish he'd step aside so we can get a stronger candidate. Like, is it still possible to push that boulder a little bit more so it rolls down the hill? I think it is still possible. It's not gonna be possible after a while, after the elections start, right? But the first one is January 23rd, so we still have a little bit of time for me and those guys who I normally do not agree with, but that can actually read numbers and understand what math and facts are and science is, for us to win and Biden to step down, and then to have an emergency primary where everybody's allowed in.
Well, Cenk, unfortunately we're out of time, but I'd love to have you back on soon to give us some more updates. I also want to tell the audience a little bit about the town hall that you're doing. You're gonna be doing a weekly town hall called Join In with Cenk, and you're inviting viewers to join in the town hall later that day. So there's a graphic showing you a little more information about it. Wednesday, December 27th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, 5:30 p.m. Pacific. Do you want to tell the audience a little more about this town hall?
Yeah, so look, you're gonna go through the QR code obviously, and or that URL. But if you go to my website, cenkforamerica.com, and you send an email, we'll send you an email on directions on how to get into that. It's including today at 5:30 Pacific, 8:30 Eastern. And what I'm gonna do, what I started last time, and what I'm gonna do with the town hall today is, get us to all act together. So there's a whole bunch of people that come to those town halls. And so I'm gonna say, all right, now look, I poll this way and that way in all these different polls. So why aren't all the polls including me? Let's go ask online on Twitter, for example, Emerson Polling. Why aren't you including Cenk in the polls when he's polling higher than several governors, tied with Chris Christie? So why are you discriminating against them? And so on that topic of discrimination, we don't have time here. I know you're out of time, but I'm gonna talk about it more on the town hall and more next time with you, because this is the discrimination against naturalized citizens is the one thing that's apparently totally okay. Like everybody's cool with it. Haha, you guys aren't fully Americans and we like to rub your nose in it. And now it's really driving me crazy.
And also in this particular context, it's the Democratic Party that's sending that message
100%.
Loud and clear. And that's the party that has really leaned into their messaging on equality for their campaigning. And what leg do they have to stand on to make those arguments when they do believe in treating certain Americans, naturalized citizens, as second-class citizens? I think that's wrong.
And we know that for a fact now because the DNC is actively calling state Democratic parties and saying, discriminate, do not let him on the ballot. He's a naturalized citizen, so he's no good. He shouldn't have the same rights as us.
Insane.
14th Amendment be damned. So cenkforamerica.com to support us, voice louder now. And we certainly need everybody to help to win on the civil rights issue as we go to court in South Carolina. Thank you, Anna.
All right, thank you, Cenk. And we'll have you on soon again to talk about more updates to your campaign. For now, though, we're gonna take a break. When we come back, we're gonna get into more of the updates out of the Gaza Strip, some damning reports by CNN about the treatment of patients in Gaza's hospitals and how the IDF has been caught desecrating bodies in these hospitals. So that and more coming up, don't miss it. Welcome to our first social break. Since we had to skip our first social break, I'm gonna do a rapid fire round here. First, starting with our members. Special thanks to our YouTube members. We have a ton of new YouTube members, including Michael Todd, Diane Argensinger, Robert Stone Jr., Ruth Rodriguez, Christopher Del Quaglio, I like that name. Trent Peterson and James Nelson, welcome to TYT Premium. You guys are fantastic, wonderful people. Thank you for supporting what we do because we could not do what we do without you. The reason why I'm able to be so frank and honest in my coverage and analysis is because you guys give me a voice and you keep me free from any censorship or corporate influence, and I am so grateful for that. Thank you to everyone who gifted memberships. That includes Beach Babe 21, who gifted 10 TYT memberships, Progressive Boomer gifted 5, and Box gifted 5. You guys are just wonderful. Thank you so much. And Donnie Robinson says, Anna, you're on fire tonight. Amen, girl. I'm guessing that had to do with my first segment, but there's more from where that came from. So just stick around. The next story is just insane. Natasha N writes in and says, I believe if Israelis living in Israel knew what was happening to innocents in Gaza, they'd stop it. Unfortunately, Israel makes sure they don't know an Israeli. Yeah, look, there is, it's really important to separate governments from the people in those countries. I know what the public opinion polling says about civilians in Israel and their support for what's happening in Gaza, but I just really want to reiterate that it would be a mistake to generalize about an entire population of people, especially when you consider the propaganda and the fear mongering in the press. We have, our own flavor of propaganda here in the United States. The same can be said about what's happening in Israel. So just be aware of that. And I know that Israelis are wonderful people. I know that if they knew the full extent of what's being done in the Gaza Strip, they would be against it. And by the way, there have been protests against what Netanyahu is carrying out, what the IDF is carrying out in the Gaza Strip. Biden's stinky stocking full of lies says, Anna, what's your prediction? Do you think more states will boot Trump from their ballots, or do you think they are still sticking to keeping him on? P.S. Love the shoulder buttons. Thank you. We actually have a story about that later in the show, so stick around for that. I don't know how other states are going to decide this issue. I know that Michigan, there's a big story out of Michigan today, which we'll fill you in on. They have not gone in the same direction that Colorado has gone in, and they've given different reasoning for it. So we'll get to that later, but I really don't know. And in the end, it's gonna be up to the Supreme Court, which I do believe will strike down any efforts to bar Trump from the primary ballots. All right, we've got Rose Orozco who says, Anna, you're awesome, beautiful and on fire. Truth, TYT, Happy New Year, girl. Thank you so much, I appreciate you. Stick around because we've got a lot more to get to, starting with our next story. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Unfortunately, our next story is no lighter from the first story that I covered in regard to updates in Gaza. I'm gonna just give you a warning ahead of time. This story is so graphic, explicit, difficult to report on, difficult to hear. So if this is something that you might have trouble listening to, just want to give you that warning ahead of time. But with that said, there was a pretty damning report from CNN in regard to Israeli Defense Forces and their treatment of Palestinian patients in a specific hospital in the Gaza Strip. I want to share that report with you right now, so let's do it. The Israeli Defense Forces' 8-day military operation at the Kamal Adwan Hospital in Gaza last week included the desecration of Palestinian bodies, according to senior medical staff, and video evidence that was reviewed by CNN. Now, CNN put out this report. I highly recommend everyone read all the details that were reported on in their piece, but I'm going to cover some of the important elements of it in this story. So as with other hospitals that have been bombed by the IDF in the Gaza Strip, other hospitals that have been shelled or experiencing sieges by the IDF. Now, Israel has justified their actions in this particular case by claiming that the hospital was used. I mean, it's so repetitive. I feel like you already know what I'm gonna say. As a command center by Hamas. Now, they have provided very little evidence so far justifying this, proving that the hospital was used as a Hamas command center. But nonetheless, I want to give you the details about what CNN was able to review in the footage that was provided to them and what the medical professionals operating out of the hospital told CNN. Now, Israeli soldiers raiding a hospital in northern Gaza desecrated the bodies of dead patients with bulldozers, let a military dog maul a man in a wheelchair, and shot multiple doctors even after vetting them for terror links. And that's according to allegations by staff and patients. Some of the patients that CNN spoke to were children who witnessed the IDF's dogs attacking a disabled patient in a wheelchair. Now, I want to give you a timeline of the operation. The operation escalated on Monday, December 11th. The next day, Israeli forces demolished the hospital complex's western wall, according to the hospital's pediatric director, Hossam Abu Safia, who said soldiers addressed the hospital with loudspeakers, instructing any men sheltering inside to come out. Now, according to Abu Safia, he and 4 other doctors were allowed to remain within the hospital to provide care for 62 people, including several infants. However, the situation within the hospital was so dire due to a lack of resources that they were unable to provide adequate care. According to Abu Safia, they were surrounded by Israeli troops with parts of the complex badly damaged by shelling. There was no care that he could offer, he said. The hospital was out of food, out of water, out of electricity, and milk for children, and hardly had any medicine left to provide adequate care to the remaining patients. Now, one of the nurses, Nurse Asma Tanish, recalls begging for water to no avail, she said. Israeli troops were half a meter away from us and surrounding us in the courtyard. We had no water, our throats were dry and we were thirsty and begging them just for a glass of water from the morning till evening, she said. Some children died during the Israeli operation at the hospital, she said, adding that nurses tried diluting milk with a salt solution to try to feed more of the hospital's youngest patients. Now, this should come as no surprise. This should not be shocking, considering Israel continues to severely limit the humanitarian aid going into the Gaza Strip. They're being denied food. They're being denied clean and safe drinking water. They're being denied medicine necessary to stay alive. And this is all happening as hospitals are being bombarded, as they're being severely damaged through shelling by the IDF. And so if they're unable to treat wounded patients, what are they supposed to do? What are the wounded patients supposed to do? There have been reports of children whose limbs have been amputated, and reporters have shown images of severe infections, of literal worms coming out of their wounds. This is barbarism. This is absolutely disgusting. But believe it or not, we haven't even gotten to the worst of this report. Among the most serious allegations is that as troops were leaving the hospital complex, they used bulldozers to dig up bodies that had been recently buried in a makeshift graveyard in the hospital's courtyard. So Abu Safia, the pediatric director that we heard from earlier, told CNN the following. The soldiers dug up the graves this morning and dragged the bodies with bulldozers, then crushed the bodies with the bulldozers. I have never seen such a thing before. Now, remember, there's a huge issue right now in the Gaza Strip when it comes to reporting, because journalists are not allowed to enter the Gaza Strip. They're not able to corroborate some of the claims being made. But CNN was able to corroborate the claims being made by looking at video evidence, and they make that clear in their reporting. Videos and images he shared with CNN show decomposing human remains scattered across the hospital grounds, CNN reports. The allegation was supported by the hospital's head of nursing, Eid Saba, and another nurse, Asma Tanish, who we heard from earlier. Satellite imagery taken on December 15th, right before the IDF withdrew from the hospital complex, shows raised grounds outside the hospital complex, further corroborating the claims made by the medical professionals in the facility. The IDF also didn't directly deny the claims. As CNN reports, the IDF did not address the allegations directly when approached for comment by CNN, but acknowledged that it had carried out an operation at the hospital. Quote, the troops apprehended 80 terrorists, some of whom took part in the atrocious October 7th massacre, it said in a statement to CNN. I would take that with a grain of salt. I wouldn't believe anything the IDF says, just as I would not believe anything a Hamas militant says in regard to what's happening on the ground in Gaza. Take it with a grain of salt, especially when you consider the disinformation that's come out from the IDF, the lies that they have told in regard to the aerial bombardments that they've done against hospitals. They claim that the Al-Shifa hospital was being used as a Hamas command center. They provided no evidence of that. Even the Washington Post came out with its own analysis. They investigated the claims made by the IDF and said, no, the IDF has provided inadequate evidence to show that Hamas was operating a command center out of the Al-Shifa hospital, which would allow for the shelling and bombardment and raid of that hospital. Now, doctors were also shot at this particular hospital, as CNN reports. Dr. Ayman Rajab was released by soldiers after questioning and then shot in the chest as he tried to make his way back to the hospital, Abu Safia told CNN. He survived the shooting and returned to his displaced family. Another doctor was shot in the leg, and Abu Safia's own son was shot in the abdomen, he said. He also alleges that he himself became a target after IDF soldiers called him in the early morning hours on Friday. Following the IDF's orders, he found a wounded elderly man lying on the ground in front of the building. But as Abu Safia tried to approach the man, he says the soldiers started firing at him. So the IDF calls on him to come outside and provide aid to a man who is severely wounded just outside the hospital. And as he listens to orders and tries to retrieve the man and bring him into the hospital to receive whatever treatment they can offer, however inadequate as it might be, he claims that IDF soldiers start shooting at him. Quote, the IDF shot at me and laughed and jeered. I escaped their gunfire, but they called me again and asked me to take the wounded elderly man lying on the ground inside again, he said. He finally brought the man inside, but it was too late. The man could not be treated in the hospital due to lack of medical resources and later died from his injuries, Abu Safia said. Now, for me, the most barbaric allegations have to do with the IDF sicking their dogs on patients within the hospital. And these claims were corroborated by children who are patients within the hospital. So apparently in another instance, Israeli military dogs wearing cameras were sent into the hospital for reconnaissance, and that's according to Abu Safia. One of the dogs attacked and mauled a wheelchair-bound elderly man before being called off. The man screamed in pain. Children and women cried from the horror of the scene. I couldn't help anyone. The scene was beyond nightmares. One of their soldiers came to take the dog and was laughing at the old man and what the dog did to him. Someone please explain to me how doing this is going to keep Israel safe. Someone please explain to me how carrying out these atrocities is somehow going to assist Israel on the international stage. There is a good reason why the international community, with the exception of the United States and the UK, are demanding a ceasefire. Absolutely demanding investigations into the atrocities committed by the IDF and the Israeli government. See, the United States, I don't know what the issue is with the UK. Okay, I don't know what persuades politicians in the UK to follow along with the United States, but I know what motivates politicians in the United States. I know what motivates pathetic, weak politicians like Senator John Fetterman in the United States. They're terrified of AIPAC. They're terrified of the Democratic majority for Israel. They're terrified of these lobbying groups who will target you and who will try to destroy your political career if you have the audacity to call on Israel to stop their atrocities in the Gaza Strip. That's what's motivating this. The fact that the US is providing cover for what's happening is so incredibly shameful. Why is the UK going along with it? But anyway, let me get back to this. The claims about the wheelchair-bound elderly man being attacked by an IDF dog were corroborated by children receiving treatment in the hospital, including one child who was receiving treatment for a broken leg. Imagine being a child. Okay, you're surrounded by death and destruction. And as you are in a hospital, a place that you're supposed to feel safe, you witness a military dog attack a wheelchair-bound elderly man, a vulnerable individual who is unable to defend himself. The Israelis let dogs come and attack us. They tortured us. They were shooting toward us. Nights were horrific. We never had sleep since we came here. They let dogs attack an old man. It kept biting him. By the way, the IDF couldn't be bothered to address these claims. Interesting. I mean, if these claims were being made against me and I didn't do it, I wouldn't hesitate to deny it, but that's not what's happening here. The IDF did not address those claims in its statements, but said its operation around the hospital was targeted on Hamas. Targeted on Hamas. Sicking military dogs on elderly men in wheelchairs. Totally targeting Hamas. Yeah, we should totally take what they're saying at face value. You know, the same military that shot and killed Abu Akleh, an Al Jazeera journalist, using sniper fire, and then denied it until multiple investigations proved that the IDF had done it. The same IDF who, put out a fake recording of so-called Hamas militants that proved, that Hamas was responsible for a mislaunched rocket that hit a hospital in Gaza. Turned out that was completely bunk, completely fake. I mean, so let's get to the IDF's evidence of this hospital being used as a command center for Hamas, okay? So, evidence of military activity or militant activity at the Kamal Adwan hospital, according to the IDF, included numerous weapons, just like at Al-Shifa. You got some AK-47s. I mean, the existence of AK-47s is not indicative of a command center, of like a headquarters for a militant group. But they say, look, we found AK-47s. We found RPGs, explosive devices, Hamas commando military equipment, technological equipment. We're supposed to take this at face value, by the way. They didn't provide evidence of that. They're just saying that's what they found. But as CNN makes clear, the presence of weaponry or wounded combatants at a hospital does not necessarily make it a legal military target. Now, there are international laws. Israel, with the help of the United States government, has done a great job in dismantling the credibility of those laws. So let's just be clear about that. Now I hear international law and I can't help but laugh at that, because clearly international laws don't matter at all when you have the world's largest military power, the United States, providing cover for Israel as it breaks international laws. Okay, so I just want to make that clear. But as CNN notes, Article 19 of the Geneva Convention states that the fact that sick or wounded members of the armed forces are nursed in these hospitals, or the presence of small arms and ammunition taken from such combatants which have not yet been handed to the proper service, shall not be considered to be acts harmful to the enemy. So in other words, if we were even to take the IDF at face value when they say that they found these weapons, that still is not enough to justify attacking a hospital. Hospitals are supposed to be safe places for civilians. The bar is much higher if you want to attack a hospital. But as we know, every single hospital in the Gaza Strip has been attacked by the IDF. None of them are functioning properly. None of them have the resources to provide adequate care to wounded Palestinian civilians. I'm sure that's all an accident. I'm sure none of that was done on purpose. I'm sure severely limiting humanitarian aid, meaning water and food necessary for human survival, is all an accident. It's all an accident. Right, okay. And the guns that they also, shared some images of people holding weapons. I want to address that as well. So the IDF last week also released photos and video showing young men holding guns in the air, militants handing in weapons after their surrender from Kamal Adwan Hospital, it alleged. But the staffers interviewed by CNN said the men were actually civilians sheltering in the hospital after being displaced from other parts of Gaza. We told them there weren't any resistance fighters in the hospital and no one listened to us, Tanish, the nurse, said. The guns that they were pictured with had actually belonged to security guards who had been guarding the hospital, and that's according to Abu Safia. And here's what he had to say: I saw with my own eyes that the army asked the displaced civilian youth and the medical team to carry the weapons of the security guards that were left in the hospital guard room, and they took pictures of them in front of me. And then they dispersed that as evidence to justify attacking the hospital. That's what's being alleged here. Now, if you don't want to believe the actual doctors operating out of the hospital and you want to believe the IDF instead, the same IDF that has carried out atrocities that have been proven in the Gaza Strip, I guess that's your decision to make. But again, every single hospital in the Gaza Strip has been targeted and attacked by the IDF, and they make the same claims every single time they target a hospital. Every single time. Oh, it's a Hamas command center. Hamas uses civilians as human shields. I mean, again, I've made this analogy before. But if family members belonging to an IDF soldier were taken at gunpoint and were used as human shields by Hamas, would they be willing to shoot through their loved ones to take out the Hamas militant? I mean, they've been clear about how little they care about the Israeli hostages that remain in the Gaza Strip. Who knows how many of them are alive at this point? But if it came down to their own family members, if Hamas was using their own family members as human shields, would they be willing to shoot through their own family members to take out Hamas and then say, there was nothing I could do, Hamas was using my family member as a human shield? Something tells me they would think twice about that. Something tells me that they would treat that situation a little differently. Something tells me that the disregard for human lives in the Gaza Strip is evident to everyone in the international community, with the exception of the governments in the United States and the UK. That's the reality of the situation. This is barbaric behavior at a time when the Prime Minister of Israel keeps framing this war as a war between civilization and barbarism. Who's carrying out the barbarism? It looks like the IDF to me. We got to take a break. John Iadarola will be joining me for the second hour. Don't miss it.
Our audience has given us everything, so we couldn't be more connected. When we first started, people would start giving us directions and say, okay, the mics are too large, move them. Turn them into lav mics. I mean, they were incredible. And then one guy walked in and gave us a really expensive switcher and said, you guys need this, and walked out. Okay, it's amazing. They helped us build a studio. They did a $2 million funding campaign for us. And so they really are us. We do this show together to the point where some of our hosts are even former listeners. So when we say that the audience is part of TYT, we really mean it.
I think what the audience also appreciates is especially if they're members, they really get an inside look into who we are, our personal lives, what drives and motivates us. It goes beyond just storytelling. I think that what we do is allow our viewers and our listeners into our daily lives, and we give them kind of like this inside look into everything that we're passionate about and why it is that we're doing what we're doing, right? Like the motivation behind what we're doing, I think, is important for our audience to know, and we're not shy about sharing that with them. And it's different from what people typically see in legacy media outlets, where everything is kind of dry and robotic and there's really no personality or authenticity that comes along with it. Oftentimes when we're doing the show, I don't really think of it as me telling them stories. I think of it as us having a mutual respect and conversation with one another. And as I said earlier, I mean, not only do I feel that through the work I do, I'm informing our audience, but they inform me oftentimes as well. You know, they'll pitch stories to us. They'll tell us, you know, a certain perspective or angle to a story that we might have missed, and I love it.
How in the world are you going to get the right to vote if you don't already have the right to vote? That's impossible. Reason they tell you things are impossible is because they don't want you to try. It only took 7 years for that to get an amendment to get a right to vote.
Does this result in millions upon millions of Americans losing their coverage? And we've been waiting to find out, and now we know, yes, it will cut millions.
Public education was supposed to be the way to equalize everyone regardless of their socioeconomic status. But if you come from a family that's poor, how are you going to afford grade school for your kids?
This fight is about fairness and morality. It's about the American values.
You think that black people all across the country, in every city, were all lying when they said the police abuse and the police kill us when they should? No, of course they weren't lying. Yes, it does happen. Yes, they do get targeted more.
Why are we going to put immigrants in prison for 5 years, which American taxpayers have to pay for, if we're so concerned with immigrants using up our so-called resources?
We're gonna do both. We're gonna fight Trump and we're gonna fight the establishment. It's not that hard. Yes, you can do both at the same time. Go tell them.
I yanked it as hard as I can.
Your words.
Bart, please grab those.
Let's see how Earth responds to that. Let's see how Earth responds to that.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Anna Kasparian, John Iadarola with you. John, how you doing?
I'm great.
How was your holiday break?
The holidays were good. It was the first Christmas for Raina, so we had a lot of fun.
So cute.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yes. I'm a little bit on edge because I had to leave for work before she woke up. And if traffic doesn't treat me right, she will be asleep before I get home. And that's very difficult, the combination of those two things. So I'm a little bit on edge, not gonna lie.
The difficulty of being a parent in modern society, right? Yeah, no, I can't imagine how difficult that is.
Yeah, but new parents shouldn't get leave though, that is clear.
Can't you just wake her up? I'm just kidding. Obviously, you can't do that. I'm not an idiot. I'm not that dumb when it comes to kids. No, that would be a disaster. Anyway, all right, I wanted to read some comments. We're super backed up on comments. You guys are very opinionated today. So I wanted to read from our Twitch community and a few member comments as well before we get to our next story. So dear D. Kashmir says, Israel thinks no one is watching the news this week. Time to get this done quick. Yeah, I mean, obviously, a lot of people are still paying attention to the news, even though a lot of members of the media are taking a break for the holidays. Ya boy 007 says, how has terrorist Netanyahu not been declared a war criminal? Well, he has been declared a war criminal by members of the international community. It's just that the United States is providing cover for what he's doing. So I wouldn't take the US government's statements at face value when it comes to Israel's military operations. Fascist Killer says, where are the photos and pictures of Hamas soldiers from that hospital that I just talked about earlier? Damn, either the IDF is the worst military ever or they're just purposely killing civilians. Worst case scenario, Dragon says, I don't mind dark news. I want the truth. Thanks TYT for giving us that. Well, look, there is a fun story in the bonus episode today for our members, tyt.com/join to become a member, or you can click on that join button on YouTube if you're watching us on YouTube. Colorado governor, man, I don't know what he was thinking, but he put out a holiday video that deserves condemnation. Okay, it deserves condemnation. So we'll talk about that in the bonus episode. I'm really looking forward to lightening things up with that story. And then a special thanks to Box, who gifted another TYT membership, and Kina gifted 5 TYT memberships. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for the support. All right, with that said, John, I'm sure you're itching to hear about what Michigan is doing with Trump on their primary ballot.
That's where that itch is from.
That's where that itch is from. Well, don't worry.
Okay,
I'm gonna help you scratch it.
Yes.
All right, let's get to it.
Michigan's Supreme Court has ruled Donald Trump can remain on the primary ballot. Multiple groups had pushed for his removal under the 14th Amendment, which bars someone from holding office if he is, quote, engaged in an insurrection. Now, you might remember Colorado's Supreme Court ruled last week that the former president cannot appear on that state's ballot due to his involvement in the January 6th Capitol riot.
Despite meddling in the Michigan election in 2020 by attempting to install fraudulent electors, the Michigan Supreme Court, the highest court in the state, of course, has split from Colorado, ruling that Trump can in fact remain on the presidential primary ballot for 2024. Now, this means it's very likely that the United States Supreme Court will have to weigh in on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which bars those who have engaged in insurrection from office, should be the interpretation, or should be interpreted. Now, I should note that after Colorado's decision to bar Trump from their primary ballot, Many states, over a dozen, had decided to attempt to do the same, at least 16. Now, courts in Arizona and Minnesota have also ruled against similar efforts to get Trump kicked off the ballot. But for the purpose of this story, let's focus on Michigan and the decisions made by the Supreme Court in that state. Now, before we get back to the current cases, let's briefly revisit how Trump tried to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. That'll give you the context necessary to determine how you feel about Michigan's decision here. So as we all know, or should know at this point, his team recruited 16 fake Trump electors to sign a certificate falsely claiming that Trump won the state of Michigan. Trump also was taped in December of 2020, pressuring 2 members of the Wayne County Board of Canvassers to not certify the election results, which of course went toward Biden, providing direct evidence of his role in trying to overturn the vote in Michigan. Now, aside from that, and the fact that you have Colorado and Michigan coming to different conclusions, there were other significant differences between the Supreme Court cases in Michigan and Colorado. So unlike in Colorado, the Michigan Supreme Court didn't actually weigh the issue. It simply declined to even hear an appeal, instead affirming the decision of 2 lower courts to allow Trump on the ballot. The Michigan Court of Claims judge who first got the case said state law doesn't give election officials any leeway to police the eligibility of presidential primary candidates. He also said the case raised a political question that shouldn't be decided in the courts. And his decision was later upheld by the Michigan Court of Appeals, which said the following: at the moment, the only event about to occur is the presidential primary election, but as explained, whether Trump is disqualified is irrelevant to his placement on that particular ballot. And here's legal scholar and professor Jessica Levinson with more on what happened when it got to the Michigan Supreme Court and how their ruling differs from the ruling in Colorado.
This is the question, right? What's the difference between the Michigan decision and the Colorado decision? And the big difference is that the Colorado Supreme Court got to the merits, meaning the substance. They got to the big legal question of what does the 14th Amendment prevent and what does it allow? In Michigan, the court did not. This is all about procedural grounds. In Michigan, there were 2 bases for the decision. The first one was this is a political question. Courts shouldn't be weighing in. So again, they didn't get to that federal constitutional question. The second was that the Secretary of State, at least on the primary election ballot, doesn't have the power to kick somebody off the ballot, doesn't have the power to determine eligibility. So this is a very different decision, not just in outcome, but in how you get to that outcome.
So John, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this, because as I shared with the audience just last week, I'm torn on whether it's a good idea to boot Trump from the primary ballots. And I should note that this question is different from whether Trump should be barred from the ballots in the general election. That issue is very likely to come up in the future. Obviously, the Supreme Court of the United States will eventually weigh in on this, and I think that they're going to rule in favor of Trump on this issue. But I'm curious what you think and what you think should happen.
I have thoughts, but I want clarification. So you said you're unsure about whether it's a good idea.
Yeah.
But that's a consideration of the effect or whatever. Do you think based on a plain reading it should be?
I think there is definitely merit to argue that this interpretation of the 14th Amendment applies to Donald Trump, considering that he did carry out an insurrection. It was a failed one, right? But I mean, we have so much evidence showing that he directly was involved in, pressuring election workers to reverse the results of the election, certainly in Michigan, where we have tapes of him doing so.
In Georgia.
Yeah, and in Georgia, we have evidence of the fake elector scheme. I mean, the evidence is there, so I do believe that there's merit. I think that's an entirely different question from the political one. And what I mean by that is, I just feel that it would be far better for Democrats to have a robust primary and choose the best possible candidate to beat Trump once and for all. I understand that people are uncomfortable with my take on this, but the reason why I say it is I just feel like it's going to further destabilize the country and our electoral process.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's gonna be all sorts of secondary consequences in the short term. There's enough right-wing whack jobs that some of them probably will carry out acts of violence, so that's awesome. But that's the consequence of almost anything happening in America, is you can expect someone's gonna shoot up a Walmart or something. Politically, the consequences, I've been clear about what I think about that. Were Donald Trump to actually be barred from being the candidate, he would be replaced by insert a Republican, and that Republican would beat Joe Biden. I think would have a much better chance against Joe Biden than Trump. So if I came out on the side of he should be barred, it is definitely not because I think that would benefit my preferred candidate or whatever. My preferred candidates aren't allowed to run at all. So it's not that. I think the merits are very interesting, but I think there is so much ambiguity. Some of it was hinted at in there, and I think the Michigan decision obviously focuses on a very different part of this than Colorado. They're focusing in part on, partially they say the political question thing shouldn't be decided by the courts. I think it's utterly cowardly. Almost everything is at core a political question that other people, you could pass the buck to other people. So I don't like that. But they're focusing on the fact that it's a primary. And I think saying, even if you think that under Section 3, he should be barred from holding the office, that doesn't necessarily mean he should be barred from being on the ballot. And even if you believe that he should be barred from being on the general election ballot, that's very different than barring him from a primary ballot, which is not even like the full official thing. It's a thing that a political party is running. So I mean, should he be barred from holding rallies? Should he be barred from stump speeches? Like this is several steps away from the actual election. So I could theoretically agree with Michigan and still think that there's something later that he could be barred for. Look, I think at the end of the day, the Supreme Court is going to decide. They're going to decide sometime in the next month, and whether we like it or not, whether it's completely biased or not, whether Thomas recuses or not, that's going to be what actually determines this. And I don't think it's super clear cut.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. Not what you're saying about the Supreme Court. I agree with you on that, and that's a perspective that I share with you. But what you were saying earlier about how this isn't really a clear-cut case and how it's several steps removed from the actual general election.
The office.
Yeah, and holding the office. I think it's a really interesting point. I'm curious what you think about the precedent it would set, let's say in an alternate reality, and I say that because I really do think SCOTUS is going to rule in favor of Donald Trump, but in an alternate reality where they don't, and they decide, no, the states that choose not to have him on the ballot are well within their rights to do that, considering the fake electors and what Trump did in trying to reverse or intervene in the 2020 presidential election. Consider the fact that Trump, even though he's facing legal challenges for what he did, he hasn't been charged with insurrection, and he hasn't been convicted yet in any of the legal challenges. And I'm talking about Georgia, of course, and the federal case against him in the election meddling trial. Does that concern you at all, considering how Biden has been accused of nonsense with no evidence? He hasn't been convicted of anything. They're trying to impeach him on false grounds. They haven't provided a shred of evidence for it. But couldn't red states try to make the same argument in regard to Biden?
Well, look, as you know, Section 3 doesn't actually say that you have to be convicted of it. It just says that you have to participate in it. Now, theoretically, I'm not a lawyer. It could be that there are clear precedents where the same word has been interpreted in other things as meaning more than just you were there. Maybe participate has often been ruled by the Supreme Court to mean you have to be charged or convicted. I don't know. And again, the Supreme Court is going to rule on that. In terms of whether this will be instantaneously slippery sloped in the red states, I mean, it already has. Marjorie Greene and a representative from Florida and Ken Paxton in Texas are already saying, Kirsty Noem, are already like, we're gonna take him off the ballot for, I don't know, the border, inflation, something, Hunter Biden's junk. They don't even know. And by the way, anything could be slippery sloped, but in a reasonable country, the wording of Section 3 is fairly specific about insurrection or giving aid and comfort to the enemies of the United States. However, we live in the least serious of times, and so it doesn't matter how specific it is. And again, fundamentally, the Republicans don't care about any of this. They will take Biden off not because they think that the definitions in Section 3 are now more expansive. They'll do it because it'll benefit them at the time. So yes, I have no doubt that they will immediately try to disqualify literally anyone who runs for president.
Well, we'll see how this all develops. this is one of those stories where it's hard for me. Like I'm split because of the the legal merits, which
I'm trying to be fair too.
Yeah,
and we don't get no credit for that, by the way.
Of course, we never do, but it doesn't matter, right? This is how I honestly feel about it. There are the legal merits, which I think are certainly there to make the case, and then there is the potential political backlash, which I don't think will bode well for the country, and certainly not the Democratic Party, even though they think that it might. We'll see how it all plays out, but we'll fill you in as this legal argument develops and as other states attempt to do what Colorado did. For now, we got to take a break. We're massively out of time. When we come back, I'm going to talk about how John Fetterman is absolutely pathetic and continues to mock the very people who got him elected in the first place. We'll be right back. What's up, everyone? Welcome to our social break. I'm gonna do a rapid fire round of super chats, starting with, my brother's calling me as I'm doing the show live because my brother doesn't watch the show. Okay.
That's an old school super chat.
All right, anyway, Ingy Bingy 2000 says, rest in peace to Tommy Smothers, political comedy legend with the Smothers Brothers show in the 60s. Rest in peace.
I didn't know that. That's
Steve writes it and says, I wonder how many Israeli civilians are okay with such atrocities. There's been some public opinion polling that is really depressing, but I'm just trying to, there's a lot of propaganda and I'm just trying to be mindful of that and not, generalize about Israeli civilians and how they feel about what's going on. I don't know how much they're aware of. I know there's a lot of fear mongering about Palestinians in the Israeli press, with the exception of a few outlets like Haaretz. So just keep that all in mind. I get really uncomfortable when people start making gross statements about an entire population of people, even as their government is carrying out atrocities. So just be careful, okay? Because I firmly believe the civilians should be protected. I firmly believe that discriminating against or making broad generalizations about any group of people is wrong. And yes, that includes Israelis. They're people too. And look, they're genuinely afraid. After what happened on October 7th, who can blame them, okay? You have to be mindful and aware of that, and you have to put yourselves in their shoes as well. At the same time, I've got no love for the far-right government of Israel, and I've got no love for Benjamin Netanyahu, who propped up and funded Hamas, and then pretends as though, he doesn't know where Hamas came from and now needs to fight them. He's a barbaric person. Jim Taleb, thank you so much for the super chat. David Rodriguez writes in and says, I turned a big 21 years old today. Can I get a happy birthday? Hope you and the TYT squad are doing well. David, go live your life, brother. You're 21. I would give anything to go back to 21. I mean, I'm 25 now, but I'm just kidding, I'm 37, but 21, you've got your life ahead of you. You're probably not jaded yet. Live the dream, man. Live the dream. Go spend time with friends. Go live life, okay? Don't get bogged down by depressing stuff all day. Just try to look at the bright side. Go bird watching. You don't have to wait until you're 37, or in most cases, in your 60s. Okay, go do it now. Go look at the birds. All right, let's go to A1 Andy, who says, watch Louis Theroux's 2011 documentary, The Ultra Zionists, yesterday. Highlights early stages of investors buying up Palestinian homes in the West Bank, plus more. Just sick, worth a watch. Thank you, Andy. I'll definitely check that out. I'm curious to watch that. All right, and we're out of time. And Frank Rockefeller says, Anna's poetic license aside, Israel is doing the West's necessary dirty work from decades of altruism, evasion, and weakness. Welcome back to TYT. We are running super late, so I'm gonna get right to our next story, John. You ready for it?
I am.
Let's do it. Freshman Senator John Fetterman continues to mock the very people who helped him get elected in the Senate in the first place. This time, he did so in the context of an interview with Politico. In fact, the piece published by Politico is titled, "John Fetterman isn't the politician you thought he'd be, and he doesn't care." The Pennsylvania Democrat has some thoughts to share on Biden, the left, and James Carville too. Now, for the purposes of this discussion, I'm gonna mostly focus on what he has to say about Biden insisting on running for re-election, even after he promised to only serve one term, and how Biden happens to be an incredibly vulnerable candidate if the election, general election of course, indeed ends up being a rematch between Donald Trump and Biden himself. Now, with that said, let's get to the details of what he had to say. Now, in the piece, Politico reporter Holly Otterbein asks Fetterman to comment on Biden's campaign and how they haven't even announced any battleground staff in the state of Pennsylvania, the state that Fetterman, of course, is a senator in. And the question was, should the campaign be more built out in the swing states at this point? And here's how Fetterman responds. "I don't give anybody advice unless on fashion." Okay, and I do know, all I do know is that the president will win Pennsylvania. And I do believe if he wins Pennsylvania, and I believe he will be a second-term president. Now, the polls don't look so great for Biden out of Pennsylvania. We'll get to that in just a moment. But after that, Otterbein follows up by mentioning how things have actually gotten a lot worse for Biden since the last time they chatted, with Trump now ahead in many polls. In fact, a Times Siena College poll shows that Trump is actually beating Biden in most battleground states, including Fetterman's state of Pennsylvania. So if you take a look at Nevada, Trump is up by 10 points. Arizona, Trump is up by 5 points. Pennsylvania, Trump is up by 4 points. Georgia, Trump is up by 6 points. Michigan, Trump is up by 5 points. Wisconsin is the outlier here, where Biden is up by 2 points. And in response to that, Fetterman said the following: "That doesn't really matter. There's a whole lifetime in politics between now and next November as well. I'm not worried about that. And I'm very vocal about this too, while there are Democrats that are being very critical about the president." Then he declared, quote, "I'll use this as another opportunity to tell James Carville to shut the F up. Like I said, my man hasn't been relevant since grunge was a thing." I still enjoy grunge. "And I don't know why he believes it's helpful to say these kinds of things about an incredibly difficult circumstance with an incredibly strong and decent and excellent president. I'll never understand that," he says. Now, Carville, of course, is he's a longtime Democratic strategist. And he is concerned that Biden is a weak candidate to put up against Donald Trump. He's worried that Biden will lose to Trump. He is concerned about that. And Fetterman's basically telling him, okay, ignore the polls and shut the F up. Okay, what do you think, John?
I don't understand why so many people seem to think that it is way worse to acknowledge reality than to just let a bad situation exist. It's like so many people seem to think like if you criticize Biden, he'll fall apart and then we'll truly be doomed. Like, if you are saying, hey, we've got so much time, man, we've got so much time. Okay, then let's make sure that we use that time well. Like, if we're gonna freak out, it seems like now would be a good time to do it, rather than later. Freaking out in April seems unwise. And it's not like he's defensive about Biden in a minor way. And he's responding to a question of, somebody's like, Biden hasn't done a single thing. And he's like, hey, that's not fair. He's a decent and excellent guy. They're just saying, like, shouldn't he have campaign infrastructure in swing states that he's currently trailing in? And you're gonna like snap at the interviewer of that? That's such a basic, fair question to ask.
It is, but the good news is that the Democratic Party and the DNC learned a lot from the failures of 2016. And so they're repeating them now.
100%.
Like, what are we gonna hear next? That Biden doesn't want to do any campaigning in the battleground states?
I don't like. It's not even like Carville isn't some like crazy like leftist or we've disagreed.
He's not
with
a
Carville
progressive
many times.
Exactly.
But he has followed. He's still capable of reading polls. And yes, it's a year away for the election, but I'd really rather be up by 4 than down by 4 at this point. And when you couple that with, it's not like, it would be one thing if Biden was in like day 90 of like a national bus tour. And it's like people are criticizing him like he's trying, man, he's trying. I honestly have no idea what Biden is up to. I could not tell you 5 things he is promising for his second term. And I follow the news every day. And I don't feel like I'm super unfair to Biden. I try to give him credit where credit is due, but at this point, I don't even know where it's due because he's a non-entity. And part of that is his fault and the DNC's fault because they've decided that he can't be bothered, inconvenienced with a primary. And so they've effectively made the primary illegal in multiple states. So you're gonna have even less discussion of Joe Biden.
Super anti-democratic, especially when these actions are taken on behalf of a president who is campaigning against Trump by saying that Trump is a threat to our democracy. Just let that sink in for a second. Finally, I have to comment on just this turn that Fetterman has taken. Look, it's one thing if Fetterman has a disagreement with progressives on an issue here and there. That's normal, and I don't think it's right to jump down someone's throat because there's a minor disagreement. However, Fetterman is now like taking on this persona of mocking progressives and essentially brushing them off. Like they're an annoyance. But keep in mind that these are people who worked really, really hard to get him elected. And so they did that based on what Fetterman was campaigning on. He was campaigning on economic justice. He was campaigning as this outsider that was going to go against the status quo that is pushed upon us by the Democratic establishment. And then he turned out to be, not only part of the Democratic establishment in terms of his ideology and his actions, but in some cases even worse, right? Because he has this whole demeanor of like, I'm double deuce, like deuces, like toward the progressives. And I don't know how that's gonna bode for him when he tries to get reelected. That's 6 years from now, so it's gonna take some time, right?
It's 4.
4 years from now, that's right, he got elected.
3 years from now.
It's been 3 years already? Senators have 6-year terms.
2022, it's not this. It's not this election. It's not the next election. It's the one after that.
Yes. Okay. So there's some time until that happens. Senators serve 6-year terms. But the one thing I will say is that it's politicians like Fetterman that lead to people checking out of politics altogether. When you think about what paved the way for someone like Trump, it was a politician like Barack Obama who was one person when he was campaigning and someone entirely different after he got elected. He campaigned on hope and change. He campaigned on economic justice. He campaigned on, anti-forever wars, anti what the Bush administration was engaging in the Middle East. But then he got elected and he expanded those wars. Okay, he got elected and he didn't bail out homeowners who were being foreclosed on. He bailed out Wall Street. And so that kind of lie to the American people and the very people who helped him get elected led to absolute disdain toward our democratic process. And this is a really dangerous time to engage in this kind of behavior and activity when an increasing number of Americans are really starting to question whether our democratic process really means anything at all, whether it's worth protecting at all. It hasn't really done much for them, so why are they gonna go out of their way to try to maintain and protect it? That is dangerous. So Fetterman, aside from offending progressives, is actually doing a lot of damage to our democratic process and Americans' faith in our democracy. And that's the main problem I have with him. Simply lying to people to get elected and then turning on them as soon as you're sitting in the Senate is pretty gross as it is. But again, I think the effects of that are actually even worse when you really stop and think about what it does to the minds of Americans moving forward in our democracy. All right, with that said, we gotta take a break. We're massively out of time. When we come back, I don't know what we're gonna cover. Hopefully something quick. Come right back. All right, what's up, everybody? Let's see. All right, welcome to the social break. Let's go to Gabby Marita, who says, Johnny Ty, yay. I knew staying up until 1 a.m. while I'm here in Spain would be worth it. Thanks, Gabby. Okay, nice to know I'm chopped liver over here. By the way, must be nice being in Spain.
That's true.
Yeah.
Throw a tie on for Gabby sometimes.
Maybe. I did a photo shoot several years ago where I was dressed in like a suit and tie. And I had a cigar. That was like the whole prop.
I remember, yeah. I remember the cigar because it stood out because you definitely don't smoke cigars.
I don't smoke cigars.
You should do that one day. Do a suit and tie.
I actually really liked the way it looked.
Why don't you do it?
Yeah, I'm considering it.
Okay.
All right, Funky Dragon says, gosh, he turned out to be so disappointing. He seemed so promising. Funky Dragon, I'm gonna assume you're referring to John Fetterman, and I agree. Jaime says Fetterman was a bait and switch as much as Santos was. What about Kirsten Sinema? That's another example.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that he's as bad as those two yet, but he's aggressive in the way that Kirsten Sinema is after the turn.
Yeah. Killa says we're sending hundreds of billions of dollars overseas, and it takes 20 billion to end homelessness. We are sending hundreds of billions of dollars overseas, and it's about the same amount for universal health care. Unbelievable. By the way, we're sending a lot of that money to a country that provides universal health care to its citizens, and I'm talking about Israel here. So Israel is not a poor country. I think people are under the assumption that they need our aid, but they actually don't. It's not some country that's like desperate for foreign aid. But anyway, 36 Chambers Dragon says, late to the party, but as always, happy holidays, TYT family. Thank you. Jackal Dragon 1991 says, sending strength to Anna. Thank you for sending strength, but don't worry, I'm too strong. Pawns 247 says, this doesn't shock me even a little in regard to the Gaza reporting that I just did. And Isborn says, maybe Fetterman is the new Manchin? Oh, what's his name? Joe Manchin. Why am I forgetting his first name? Yeah, Joe Manchin. Maybe, super depressing. Kinna upgraded TYT membership to TYT Premium. You're awesome, thank you for the support. We've got nutritionist Liz, who's been a member for 36 months. Where have we seen bulldozing of murdered bodies? War crimes, pure and simple. Kieran Murphy, who's been a member for 8 months, says this is the most depressing election cycle in a while. Neither of the leading candidates seem interested in a primary process or debates in general. That's a really good point, and I agree with you. It's very rare for me to say that I feel no hope, but I'm not really looking forward to much in this election. What is there to look forward to? There's no one to root for, and that's the depressing part. All right, let's get back to the show. Not okay, but people, whether we're talking about media personalities or politicians, keep getting swatted, and we gotta talk about it. So let's do that. There is this nationwide swatting pattern targeting political figures, and Marjorie Greene, a member of Congress, of course, happens to be one of the latest victims of this. In fact, she alleges that she has been swatted several times. So her home in Georgia was swatted on Christmas morning, and she posted about it on social media saying, I was just swatted. This is like the 8th time on Christmas with my family here. My local police are the greatest and shouldn't have to deal with this. I appreciate them so much, and my family and I are in joyous spirits celebrating the birth of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Now, here's what allegedly happened. Mayor Rodney Bailey of the, Major Rodney Bailey of the police department in Rome, Georgia, said that a person based in Rome, New York, made a call to the suicide hotline claiming that he got shot, that he had shot his girlfriend at Greene's address in Georgia and threatened to kill himself next. I just gotta pause for a second. If the authorities have been called to this specific address like 8 times, as Marjorie Greene says, shouldn't they know that this is a target of fake allegations?
I think they might well already know that, yes.
Yeah. Anyway, look, this is awful. I don't like Marjorie Greene as a person or as a politician, but her family doesn't deserve this, and this could, luckily it hasn't, but this could end up in a disastrous situation, okay? So I wanna just be very clear that I'm against this. Police then contacted Greene's local security liaison to inform the Congresswoman's team about the call. Her security team decided officers didn't need to respond to her home, according to Bailey, and a police response was canceled. So luckily it ended in this way, but I also wanna just note that various media personalities have also been targeted with these swatting techniques. Tim Pool, another individual that I disagree with vehemently, politically speaking, has been swatted several times. He doesn't have a security liaison that's in contact with the local authorities, right? So that could have ended terribly for him and his staff. Guys, this is not the right way to handle the situation. I get it, like people are feeling powerless. They feel like they don't have the ability to hold politicians and various people in society accountable for their actions. So they resort to these kinds of tactics. But this isn't persuading anyone to do anything for you, you know?
Yeah, it's terrible. So it's objectively reprehensible, don't do it. First of all, if you think it's gonna accomplish your goals, they're not. The police aren't gonna bust down her door. It's also terrible, both to her and her family, if someone were to be hurt or whatever. Also, it provides them with the sham cover to both sides' political violence. She will take this and she will hold this up as an equivalent to January 6th.
It makes her a victim too, right?
Yeah, well, it legitimately makes her a victim.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know that she needs it. She would pitch herself to be as a victim anyway, but this is actually making a victim out of her. So don't do it. It's terrible on every level.
So the authorities were able to find the suspect. Local police were reportedly called by the suspect, who took responsibility for the incident and said that they were just upset about Ms. Greene's stance on transgender youth's rights. But what you did is not persuading her to change her mind on it. It's not gonna change the situation in a way that's favorable to the individual who engaged in the swatting tactic. It's just not smart. And in another post by Marjorie Greene, she says, I've been swatted 8 times, but the FBI can't seem to figure out who is responsible for the swatting and says the law doesn't allow them to track them down. I mean, they did track them down. So that's kind of a lie. The FBI can do so many things, has even abused FISA to spy on hundreds of thousands of Americans, but cannot figure out who wants me killed by a hail of bullets fired by a SWAT team responding to murder-suicide calls supposedly coming from me. And by the way, I want to be clear, there are other politicians, Democrats, who have been swatted as well. First, let's go to GOP Congressman Brandon Williams. He's from New York, the 22nd district there. He was swatted on Christmas Day. Our home was swatted this afternoon thanks to the deputies and troopers who contacted me before arriving. They left with homemade cookies and spiced nuts. Merry Christmas, everyone. Spiced nuts sound fun. I like spicy nuts.
That did not take long.
But finally, Boston Mayor Michelle Wu, who is a Democrat, she was also swatted on Christmas. Some people not feeling the holiday cheer. This was days after she sparked right-wing outrage for hosting an event for local elected officials of color and excluded white politicians from the area. The fake emergency call came into the city's 311 system around 5:30 p.m. Monday evening. It was ultimately routed to 911 dispatchers. A man told officials that he shot his wife at an address in Roslindale and that she was tied up along with a man in the house. She had allegedly been the victim of a handful of swatting calls since she was elected mayor of Boston in 2021. Look, I don't agree with what she did either. I think that it's divisive to do what she did. She doesn't deserve to be swatted. No one does. It is a misuse of our resources. It's incredibly cruel. It can be incredibly dangerous. Don't be stupid. If you want to hold politicians accountable, you got to strategize and find methods that will actually yield the results that you want, rather than doing things that could harm someone, could actually hurt someone. That's not the right way to go about it. Members only bonus is next, tyt.com/join.